Hi, Dan Verton, Executive Editor with MeriTalk, and we are at the 2016 FITARA Forum and also the Data Center Exchange Brainstorm here in Washington, D.C., and I'm speaking today with Mr. Flip Anderson. Flip is the Executive Director of FITARA Operations at USDA. Flip, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So that is a very unique title in government today, is it not?
It is. I think I'm one of one.
One of one. I really want to talk to you about your job. What does the Executive Director of FITARA Operations do at USDA, and is this something that's going to hopefully catch on at other agencies?
Well, I don't know whether it'll catch on or not, but I know a lot of people are paying attention to what USDA is doing when it comes to implementation of FITARA. We were the first to be approved. Back in October, we were the only one to get approved. In November, we were one of two, and I think now 22 of the 27 have finally gotten approved. But a lot of it was because we had a singular focus on cooperation, collaboration, communication between the CXOs.
Right.
And so that helped us get through this pretty rapidly.
Right. So who do you work for?
I work for Joyce, who is the Deputy CIO for Policy and Planning, Joyce Hunter.
Right.
Who works for our CIO, Jonathan Album.
Right.
And it was interesting how this came about because I was at one point the acting Associate CIO for Information Resource Management, and I had capital planning, enterprise architecture, IT governance. A lot of those were the pillars of what FITARA was based off of. And I also had responsibility for implementing FITARA. We were briefing the Deputy Secretary on FITARA, and she looked at me and said, Flip, is this the only thing you're doing? And my response was, I wish. And she turned to the CIO and said, I think we need to make FITARA a office in itself with a SL that manages it. And that's where it originated from.
So I heard you talk a lot about, in your presentation here at the FITARA Forum, about resources. And I think that's something all agencies are dealing with, but I don't think a lot of us, particularly in the media, realized that FITARA could not be implemented properly without the appropriate resources at the agency level. So what is that gap? What does it look like?
Well, the first thing we needed to do was identify what it was that FITARA was asking us to do. And then of that, what are we currently doing and what are we not doing? And there was a lot of things that we were not doing, and the problem was we're not resourced to do it. Examples, it says that the CIO will approve all IT contracts. Well, that's a lot of contracts that within an agency the size of USDA, we're talking thousands and thousands of contracts. Well, we don't have anybody that does that. And in the acquisition, they review the contracts, they make sure that the appropriate language and other requirements are in there, but they're not the ones looking at it to say, does this contract make sense? Should they be buying this? How does it fit with the existing infrastructure, architecture, et cetera? Now you got to have somebody that goes in and thoroughly goes through the function of that contract, not the T's and C's, the terms and conditions, et cetera. And so that took another body, or two, or three. It also says that we will participate, we being OCIO, in all of the component IT governance processes. Well, we got 29 agency and staff offices. They all have their own governance process on top of or underneath the department's governance process. So they want us to set in on their IPTs, set in on their review boards, et cetera. We're not resourced to do that. And so we got to come up with additional bodies to do that stuff.
Right.
Now going out and meeting with all of the different CXOs, the budget director, the acquisition director, the CFO, the CHICO, and understand their processes, their procedures, help them write new policies. We're not resourced to do that.
Right. And I think you mentioned it, I know Joyce also mentioned it, you have a CIO Council at USDA?
Correct.
So what is that, but also what's your role in that?
So I'm on the periphery of the CIO Council. The voting members are generally component level CIOs. We have a couple of OCIO staff, the deputies that are voting members as well. But we bring activities to the council for them to consider vote on, make a determination whether it's something we need to go and pursue. In the case of FITARA, we've got a couple of requirements in FITARA that, again, we're not resourced to do. And one of the things that I asked them to do was look at the IT maturity model that was pushed down and take ownership of it. And they did that. And so the CIO Council became the business owner of the IT management maturity model. They created the survey, dished it out to all of their peers, and we just got the results back on that. That was like 104 questions on that, if you've ever seen that maturity model.
Right.
Addresses acquisition, budget formulation, budget execution, organization and workforce. And so we're getting a perspective of our maturity from the agencies, we call them agencies, the component level. And then I turned around and did the same thing at the CXO level. And so I let the CIOs in the CIO Council handle their peers, and I'm handling the CXOs.
Okay. So, obvious question would be, now I want to ask it, how do you do FITARA correctly? What does it take, right, in terms of resources? But I'm sure you guys are doing it correctly, but you're doing it, like you said, with volunteers who have 12 other jobs, right?
Yep.
If you had to do it correctly, in other words, you had people dedicated, what kind of resource pool are we looking at here?
So when I was first assigned the responsibility for FITARA, I actually put a manpower requirement down. I put a funding request in. And what I looked at, it would have taken me 7 FTEs and about $3 million for the first year. But there's also some funding required to update our systems to take the data in that we're collecting from FITARA. We have a system we call AgMax. That's where we do our portfolio management and our CPIC stuff. A lot of the data that we're collecting from FITARA should be going into AgMax, but we don't have the funding to update AgMax to accept the data. And what that would preclude is us having to do data calls every time we need information from the agencies. They could just go in there, provide the data, and then we could just pull it.
Right. Well, that's amazing. So if you think about scaling that across government agencies that are as large or if not bigger than USDA, that's it takes a lot.
Yeah, and from the resource perspective, and you heard when I talked, I need somebody that's got experience with capital planning. I need somebody that's got enterprise architecture experience. I need somebody that's got a little security, HR background. So when we go out and we're talking to each of the CXOs, it's not like we're speaking a foreign language and we don't understand their lexicon or their syntax of how they're doing business.
Right.
And so when I went out and met with each of the CXOs before, I had an EA guy that was smart, about process improvement, process reengineering, business focused, et cetera. And so as I'm listening to what they're telling me, I don't have to learn enterprise architecture to understand how EA fits into this. I got a guy that's watching that.
Right. Last question. So you're about as perfect a person to ask about the future CIO of the federal government than anybody. We talked a lot today about roles and responsibility, how they're changing with FITARA and other things. We also talked about qualifications. What kind of person do we need in the CIO role? How do you see the CIO role evolving, say, 5-10 years from now?
Well, it's interesting because I did not realize when I left DOD and came into the non-DOD space that CIOs were responsible for IT investments. In the DOD space, we have program executives that were groomed in the acquisition arena that manage the investments. So for non-DOD CIOs, these guys quickly have to learn about the acquisition world, not just the contracting, but program managers, testing evaluation, requirements generation, et cetera. And these guys, what I'm noticing, a lot of CIOs in the non-DOD space, they grew up in the end user support arena. They know how to do data centers, they know how to do infrastructure, tier 1, tier 2 help desk type stuff. But they never really had to manage from cradle to grave investments. And now all of a sudden you become a CIO and you've got a portfolio of investments, you got a bunch of program managers under you, and you're trying to understand why are these things either not succeeding or failing miserably, and you don't have that acquisition background.
Wow. So when we earlier this morning, we talked about the CIO role changing in a way that suggested perhaps they need to be more technically competent, but what you're saying is they also need significant business acumen.
Yep. And I always saw the CIO role as the mediator between the business and the IT. You know, he's got to be able to understand the IT, but then in plain English, convey that to the business owner. And so when the business owner comes in and says, you know, I've got a business process I want to automate, how do I do that? The IT guy takes that business process, the CIO, gives it to his IT guys and says, this is the business process, how do we automate it? And he's talking in IT language to the guys that are going to do the automation, and then he's talking in business language to the guys that have the requirement.
Right, excellent. Well, I'm Dan Verton, Executive Editor at MeriTalk, and we've been speaking with Mr. Flip Anderson. Flip, again, is the Executive Director of FITARA Operations at USDA. Flip, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching.